I received the report 6 months ago. No introduction. No sender's name on the envelope. Only a note typed on thin yellow paper, folded twice as if it had traveled far before reaching my hands. It read, "There's a gas station on Route 191 that shouldn't be there. I stopped for gas last week." It burned down in 1999. Inside, there was a small USB drive. The footage contained nothing extraordinary, just dashboard video from a semi-truck driving through northern Arizona at night. Until minute 3:24 a.m., that's when faint lights appeared on the horizon. Two rectangles of pale yellow, like old halogen lamps struggling to stay awake. I verified the coordinates twice. That segment of Route 191 has been abandoned for years. The nearest operating station lies 40 miles south. The one shown in the video, Mirage Gas Stop, burned to the ground on July 12, 1999, killing 3 people. One of them, an attendant named Nicanor Salgado, was pronounced dead at 3:47 a.m. Still, the GPS in the footage tracked the truck slowing down, pulling in and stopping for exactly 23 minutes before continuing. I could have dismissed it as a hoax, if not for what came next. The temperature inside the cab dropped by 5 degrees in under 10 seconds. The driver's reflection vanished from the windshield, as if light itself refused to remember him. I replayed that frame 32 times, and in the far right mirror, for just a single second, you can see something that shouldn't exist, a fuel pump, still glowing. That's when I decided to drive there myself. I left just after midnight with a full tank spare fuel in the bed and the kind of list I make when I dawn. To trust my own attention, handheld thermometer, analog compass paper maps with penciled mile markers, a camera that doesn't care about software updates. The night over Route 191 was clear in the way hospital corridors are clear, clean, bright, and quietly wrong. Past Holbrook, the radio thinned to a dry hiss. Country stations dissolved into AM skeletons, foreign voices rising and falling like waves. Between mile markers, the desert pressed close. Sagebrush, fence wire, the pale ribs of cattle bones bleached to memory. The dash clock clicked from 2:31 to 2:32, a sound I had never noticed until the silence made room for it. At 2:58 a.m., I pulled onto the shoulder and killed the headlights to let the eyes recalibrate. The dark was not empty. It was textured sand grains shifting, a far-off coyote puncturing the mile-deep hush. When I stepped out, the air smelled faintly of creosote and cold iron. My breath came out narrow and straight, like a line drawn on glass. The thermometer read 51 degrees Fahrenheit. The compass settled north with an almost grateful sigh. Nothing unusual. That's the thing about anomalies. They behave perfectly until they don't. I drove again, slower now, measuring distance against a memory that wasn't mine. According to the trucker's GPS log, the approach begins with 2 low lights on the horizon, too warm to be stars, too steady to be aircraft. At 3:12, a hint of color appeared where the earth meets the sky, a bruised yellow seam that lingered even when I blinked. I told myself it was the after image of my dash display. The camera recorded nothing special: asphalt, reflector studs, the ghostly wink of road paint. Yet the cabin felt subtly pressurized, as if the windshield were bowing outward against a higher silence. The thermometer on the passenger seat shivered 2 degrees down without a breeze, then crept back up like a child deciding not to cry. I passed a shuttered trading post and a billboard whose paint had eroded into pure suggestion. Every landmark on the map existed where it should, except for the one I was hunting. At 3:20, the faint seam brightened. Not brighter, exactly closer. The odometer rolled a mile, then half a mile, then a quarter, and the road ahead took on that wet look asphalt gets before rain. Except there were no clouds, no humidity, only the clean emptiness of high desert. The dash clock advanced to 3:24. In the right-hand mirror, the stars weakened. shrinking to pinpricks as if the night behind me were forgetting how to shine. I eased off the throttle and let inertia decide. The truck coasted, the engine ticking in small metallic syllables. That's when the smell arrived, burnt coffee carried on cold air. Not strong, just enough to graft itself onto the back of the throat. I marked the mileage, blinked twice to break the spell of pareidolia, and reached to steady the camera. The lens reflected a quick, narrow flare from somewhere low and ahead, the way old halogen bulbs breathe when the ballast is failing. I told myself there would be nothing there. I told myself that twice. And then I crested the shallow rise where the trucker claimed the world arranged itself into a place that had been fire. I stepped under the awning and the air inverted. Heat above, cold at my knees, a layered atmosphere like pages in a book you're not allowed to read. Soot drifted down in quiet spirals, then hesitated midair and rose again as if the ceiling were a lung exhaling through steel. The pumps faced me at an angle they hadn't owned a moment earlier. Paint the color of old bruises. Glass dials clouded, but alive with a skitter of static. The price wheels twitched, coughed, and settled on numbers that belonged to another decade. I touched the island curb, warm, not sun-warm, memory warm. My glove came up blackened, the residue clinging like the inside of a chimney. It smelled faintly of sugar burned to bitterness and hair singed close to skin. A nozzle hung loose, sweating a single bead that refused to fall. When I leaned close, the hose drew in a thin breath, then gave it back. A dryer vent sound. A house breathing through its bones. The bead finally dropped and stained the concrete with a ring darker than shadow. The analog meter clicked one notch without help. 0.01 gallons, no hum from a motor. Just that internal click like a vertebra settling. The second bead formed, trembled, and vanished, not downward but sideways, as if absorbed by the light. Under the canopy, temperature wavered. A heat shimmer strobed over the pump's chrome and sketched outlines where no bodies stood. Not people positions. Someone bending, someone turning. The choreography of routines preserved after the dancers left. The wind carried a ribbon of air that should have smelled like dust. It smelled like coffee boiled past usefulness. I kept still until the smell thinned and the quiet shaped itself into a pattern, a faraway ticking, then a pop, then the sigh a flame makes when it finds lacquer. The awning creaked and settled its weight an inch lower, groaning like timber that remembers a voice. My receipt still in my pocket grew warmer against the leg. The clock above the dark store hummed. Its frozen hands did not move, yet the green halo around them brightened, dimmed, brightened, as if the idea of 347 were breathing too. I set the gloved fingers on the pump handle. The metal did not feel like metal. It felt like a palm meeting a palm through a door. For a moment, the hose changed tone, not louder, only more certain. Air moved. The world took a measured inhale. Behind me, the road held its breath. I stepped under the awning and the air inverted. Heat above, cold at my knees, a layered atmosphere like pages in a book you're not allowed to read. Soot drifted down in quiet spirals, then hesitated midair and rose again as if the ceiling were a lung exhaling through steel. The pumps faced me at an angle they hadn't owned a moment earlier. Paint the color of old bruises. Glass dials clouded, but alive with a skitter of static. The price wheels twitched, coughed, and settled on numbers that belonged to another decade. I touched the island curb, warm, not sun-warm, memory warm. My glove came up blackened, the residue clinging like the inside of a chimney. It smelled faintly of sugar burned to bitterness and hair singed close to skin. A nozzle hung loose, sweating a single bead that refused to fall. When I leaned close, the hose drew in a thin breath, then gave it back. A dryer vent sound. A house breathing through its bones. The bead finally dropped and stained the concrete with a ring darker than shadow. The analog meter clicked one notch without help. 0.01 gallons, no hum from a motor. Just that internal click like a vertebra settling. The second bead formed, trembled, and vanished, not downward but sideways, as if absorbed by the light. Under the canopy, temperature wavered. A heat shimmer strobed over the pump's chrome and sketched outlines where no bodies stood. Not people positions, someone bending, someone turning. The choreography of routines preserved after the dancers left. The wind carried a ribbon of air that should have smelled like dust. It smelled like coffee boiled past usefulness. I kept still until the smell thinned and the quiet shaped itself into a pattern, a faraway ticking, then a pop, then the sigh a flame makes when it finds lacquer. The awning creaked and settled its weight an inch lower, groaning like timber that remembers a voice. My receipt still in my pocket grew warmer against the leg. The clock above the dark store hummed. Its frozen hands did not move, yet the green halo around them brightened, dimmed, brightened, as if the idea of 347 were breathing too. I set the gloved fingers on the pump handle. The metal did not feel like metal. It felt like a palm meeting a palm through a door. For a moment, the hose changed tone, not louder, only more certain. Air moved. The world took a measured inhale. Behind me, the road held its breath. The glow under the canopy deepened until it seemed to carry weight. My pupils tightened, then adjusted, and for an instant the shadows turned translucent. Beneath the surface of the light, movement. Not wind, not insects, fragments of a seam caught mid-breath. A man bending over a cash drawer. A woman in a red jacket lifting a coffee pot. A third shape halfway between both, blurred as if the air couldn't decide which moment to keep. They were not images. They were the afterimage of heat. The pumps exhaled again. The air smelled of lacquer and rain that never happened. My pulse drummed inside my skull like something knocking from the wrong side of bone. I told myself it was adrenaline. I told myself things like that before. I walked toward the store door. The glass reflected me for a second, then replaced me with someone else, same height, same posture, but standing farther inside. The reflection blinked and kept watching. When I reached for the handle, the metal pulsed once under my palm, a heartbeat returning to an object. Inside, the floor was tacky, the tiles faintly soft under my boots as though warped by old heat. The hum of the fluorescence came in waves. It wasn't sound. It was pressure. It made the blood in my ears beat out of sync with my heart. Every product on the shelves was intact but ancient. Candy bars with logos I'd forgotten, prices that belonged to the 90s, a newspaper dated the week of the fire folded on the counter. The ink had melted into brown ghosts of headlines. I passed a coffee urn still steaming. The liquid was black, viscous, reflecting the ceiling in exact detail except for the lights. The reflection showed all of them on, but above me half of them were dead. I reached for the pot. The handle was room temperature, yet the air above it shimmered. My fingertips came away wet, not with moisture but with warmth, as though touching the memory of heat. In the reflection of the urn, something shifted behind me, a blur of shape and light where the doorway should be. I turned. Nothing. Just the desert static breathing through the open door. The clock above the counter hummed louder. The hum carried rhythm, now 3 beats, pause, 4, 347, over and over. The thermal printer clicked again. This time, the paper unspooled longer. The text didn't print in a line, but in fragments. 347 payment cash attendant. N. Salgado, thank you. The strip fluttered to the floor. When I bent to pick it up, the tiles felt warmer through the solace of my boots. The warmth traveled upward, slow, deliberate, like someone pressing a match to the world beneath me. The pumps outside groaned. A bloom of orange light rippled across the windows, then died. The receipt in my hand curled into a spiral and sighed, as if exhaling smoke that never formed. I closed my fist around it. The warmth lingered. Everything smelled suddenly and exactly like July. The orange pulse on the windows faded, but its echo stayed. The light left the impression of motion behind my eyelids, a smear of flame that refused to die even when I blinked. The hum of the ceiling lights lowered into a throatier register, and the air began to taste like battery metal and salt. I tried to step back, but the floor resisted as if the solace were glued to some thin film that stretched when I moved. The heat was no longer rising from below. It was returning from the walls, exhaled by the paint, radiating from every label on every product. The air shimmered like it was trying to remember color. The receipt at my hand kept flexing, not from the wind, but from its own temperature. Tiny curls of smoke note, dust lifted from its edges. The letters on it brightened until they were the only light in the room, floating above the paper before fading, leaving the strip blank again. Somewhere behind the counter, glass cracked. A jar burst inward, scattering candy that rolled only halfway before stopping. The radio near the register coughed once, caught a signal that wasn't there, and whispered a single tone, an ascending chime, mechanical and human all at once. It took me a moment to realize the chime was breathing. The sound came in waves. Short inhalations, long exhales. Between each, the air seemed to thicken, rippling with heat that had no source. The light in the room dimmed to a red that wasn't illumination but recollection, the color of a place replaying its last second. I turned toward the doorway. The silhouette outside was no longer mine. It had the same outline, the same posture, but it flickered like a film melting in a projector. When it shifted its weight, the pumps outside responded. Handles twitched. Hoses coiled slightly, the meter wheels spun backward. Each rotation of those wheels corresponded with a pulse in my wrist. One counted 3, then 4. The number of deaths in the fire had been 3, the 4th. I tried not to finish the thought. The floor pulsed once, a slow thump under the soles of my boots, like the first compression of a heart not yet convinced to beat. The heat reached its threshold and then changed texture, no longer warmth, but vibration. The hum became a low roar under my sternum, spreading into my arms. My vision narrowed to a circle of red light. On the counter, the coffee urn began to whistle softly. Steam climbed in ribbons, forming shapes I didn't want to name. The reflection in the urn wasn't me anymore. It was someone in a blue apron, leaning forward, featureless, faceless, with the word Nicanor faintly visible on a name tag. He raised a hand toward me, or perhaps I raised mine first. The movements matched exactly, mirrored but reversed, like we were two sides of a flame learning how to become one. The reflection blinked, the whistle deepened. The last thing I remember before the glass went dark was the exact sound of pouring. Not the liquid, just the action. When the room fell silent again, my hand was wet, and the clock was still at 3:47. The first breath I took after the silence was heavy, like inhaling through cloth. My hand was wet, but not from water. It smelled faintly of sugar and gasoline. When I lifted it toward the faint ceiling light, I saw the reflection of the liquid on my skin shimmer in pale gold, like oil catching sunlight underwater. The coffee urn had stopped steaming. What remained on its surface was still, but the reflection inside wasn't. It shifted slower than motion, smoother than memory. The faceless figure leaned back, and I understood the impossible geometry of what I was seeing. He was moving away from me inside the reflection, but the depth behind him kept growing, a corridor of mirrored fire widening with every breath I took. Somewhere deep inside that mirrored corridor, a sound returned, the distant pop of pressurized gas igniting, then the echo of collapsing metal. The air around me reacted before the sound arrived. Heat brushed the nape of my neck like a whisper from the wrong direction. The clock above the register hummed louder, the second hand twitching but never advancing. Each twitch corresponded to the pulse in my temples. The hum layered over itself until it wasn't sound anymore but texture, a vibration the air learned to wear. The mirror corridor deepened again. Within it, I saw what Heat remembers, a row of pumps, all alight, and shapes moving between them in slow, practiced rhythm. Not ghosts, not memories. A repetition, automated and eternal. A fire replaying its rehearsal. The blue apron appeared again, then 3 others. All faceless. All working. One dragging a hose across melted concrete. Another replacing a nozzle that no longer existed. They weren't looking at me, but the angle of their bodies suggested awareness. A choreography meant for someone else, maybe for whoever chooses to watch. My reflection joined them. I didn't move, but the mirrored version of me did. Stepped forward, reached for a handle, turned it. The handle and the reflection yielded, and the pump meter spun once, slow, deliberate. 0.01 gallons. Outside, the real pump answered the gesture. A metallic tick echoed through the station, followed by a breath of air that smelled of char and rust. A flicker of heat washed across the glass. The mirrored self lifted his head then, and where his eyes should have been, 2 small glows pulsed in rhythm with the clock. The faceless attendants around him stopped, mid-motion, heads tilting toward the same point, toward me. The sound that filled the room after that wasn't loud. It was wide. It came from every surface, every shelf, every forgotten product. A long, drawn-out inhale that lasted far too long to belong to any lungs. The ceiling lights burst one by one, not with sparks, but with soft sighs, as if the building were relieving pressure. The red hue bled into orange, then white. The mirrored corridor inside the urn flared into brightness. The heat that reached me wasn't physical, it was memory, replayed with accuracy. I realized then the place didn't haunt. It reenacted, and it needed someone to play the missing part. The receipt in my pocket started to print again, not on paper, but inside the mind. Every heartbeat a new line. Time, 3:47 a.m., repeated between pulses. My reflection raised his hand again. The blue apron rippled with static light. I lifted mine in answer, and somewhere between the real and the remembered, our fingers touched. The moment our fingers met through the reflection, everything stopped pretending to be solid. The mirror didn't shatter, it softened, folding the world inward like paper soaked in light. My skin tingled with heat that didn't burn, but recognized. The sensation was intimate, like being remembered by something you'd never met. The reflection inhaled sharply, and the pumps outside answered with a collective groan. Their hoses straightened, then coiled like muscle fibers under tension. The ground trembled, not enough to throw me off balance, just enough to remind me that weight and memory are not the same thing. The first sound that followed was laughter. Not human laughter, the sound fire makes when it finds oxygen, playful, eager. It rolled through the canopy beams, up the support poles, and into the air around my head. Heat became color. The ceiling fluorescence melted into amber veins that spread across the plaster, tracing outlines of rooms that once existed here. A storage space, an office, a narrow hallway that ended at a restroom door. The building was remembering itself. Everywhere the fire touched, it replaced absence with motion. A coffee cup trembled and stood upright. Shelves restocked themselves with labels no one printed anymore. The red jacket from the earlier silhouette hung on a hook near the door, fabric twitching as if stirred by invisible shoulders. In the reflection, my own body was shifting. The blue apron was now mine. My hands moved in rhythm with the phantom attendants outside, calibrating pumps, wiping non-existent glass, counting imaginary bills. I wasn't watching anymore, I was participating. I tried to step back, but the air had thickened into something tangible, like wading through honey. Each breath arrived slower, coated in heat. My pulse synchronized with the clicking of the pump meters. 1.2.3.3. Outside, the desert sky was wrong. The stars blurred into streaks of orange, like sparks trapped underwater. The sand rippled, waves of color crawling across its surface. The boundary between fire and ground was no longer clear. Something moved past the window, a figure walking the perimeter. Not faceless this time, but overexposed, as if too bright to identify. The outline of a man, head tilted in curiosity, holding a gas nozzle like a torch. When he turned, his mouth moved. I didn't hear words, but I felt the shape of them. My name. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't spoken. It was exhaled. The reflection mirrored the gesture. My own lips parted, forming a name that didn't belong to me anymore. Syllables burned into air, half smoke, half sound. The moment it left my mouth, the room exhaled with me. Every pump clicked once. Every light flickered to white. And then the fire returned, not as destruction, but as correction. The station didn't ignite. It reset itself to the moment of heat that defined it. A loop closing perfectly, sealing me inside the instant where memory and reality overlapped. The clock didn't move. It never would. But beneath its frozen hands, a small spark flickered, steady as breath. I realized I could hear voices again, 3 of them, whispering the rhythm of combustion, and a fourth mind joining in, perfectly timed. I don't remember leaving the station. I remember waking up to the sound of my own truck idling, the soft mechanical purr vibrating through the steering column. The windshield was coated with thin dust, as though years had passed instead of minutes. The digital clock on the dash blinked 3:47 again and again, the colon between the numbers stuttering like a pulse caught mid-beat. The night outside was perfectly still. The air had the calm that follows storms that never happened. The awning was gone. The store gone. No debris, no smoke, not even the scar of a foundation, just flat desert stretching outward, as if the land had erased its own coordinates. The fuel gauge showed full. I hadn't filled it. On the passenger seat lay the folded receipt. Clean, crisp, no burns, no ink. But when I turned it over, faint indentations traced across the paper. The ghost of letters burned too deep to see, too shallow to read. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky was clear. I stepped out of the truck. My boots pressed into undisturbed sand. The sound was wrong. Not crunch, not shift, but exhale. The sand sighed beneath my weight and leveled itself again when I lifted my foot. The compass on my wrist spun slowly before deciding on north, but the direction it pointed to felt different, as if the pole had shifted a few miles while I wasn't looking. The desert horizon shimmered pale orange, even though dawn was still an hour away. For a moment, I thought I saw the outline of the pumps again, just shapes, suspended light. But the shimmer folded into the air, leaving only heat that didn't belong in that temperature. I started the engine. The ignition caught instantly, smoother than it ever had. The truck smelled faintly of coffee and burnt plastic. I watched the odometer. It had rolled forward exactly 23 minutes worth of distance. On the CB radio, static whispered, then cleared. A voice I didn't recognize broke through, flat, slow, as though reading a report. Route 191 clear. No stations open north of Holbrook. No structures at coordinates. Then silence. I waited, listening for my own voice in the echo, but nothing returned. When I drove off, the rearview mirror showed the desert behind me flattening into mist. No horizon, no lights. Just the color of something that's been erased too often. At mile marker 47, I caught one last scent, gasoline and sugar, and then it was gone. That's when I looked at my right hand. The skin had faint gray ridges shaped like letters. Raised, blister thin, Nes Elgato, and for a second, maybe less, the radio crackled with the faintest human sound. Breathing, not mine. I drove until the first edge of dawn cracked the horizon. The sky bled from black to cobalt, but the light didn't reach far enough to touch the memory of where I'd been. Even when the sun rose, the air around the truck stayed the same shade of night. I pulled over at mile marker 63, stepped out, and let the desert wind dry whatever still clung to me. The horizon was clean, no silhouettes, no station, no proof. Only my reflection in the truck window, blinking slower than I was. When I closed my eyes, the sound returned. Not fire, not windwork. The rhythm of pumps, the sliding of drawers, the whisper of paper through a thermal printer. The pulse of a life that refused to end just because time decided to stop measuring it. I think that's what places like the Mirage Station are. Not hauntings, but continuations. Loops where energy repeats itself until someone interrupts the pattern, until someone watches. The mind always looks for logic in the impossible. I told myself I was dreaming, that exhaustion had built a mirage so complete it fooled my instruments, my senses, my sanity. But dreams don't fill fuel tanks. They don't leave names etched into skin. When I checked my wrist again, the compass needle no longer moved, just pointed west, toward nothing. I started the truck once more, letting the engine's hum erase the silence. The road ahead shimmered with heat even though morning was cold. And in that vibration between rubber, asphalt, and distance, I understood the simplest, most horrifying truth. Some fires don't die when you extinguish them. They survive in repetition, waiting for the next passerby to supply oxygen. At 3:47 a.m. 26 years ago, the Mirage gas stop burned itself out. At 3:47 a.m. last night, it remembered, and I was the witness it needed to keep existing. The receipt lies beside me now, sealed in glass. The letter is no longer visible, but if you tilt it under certain light, the word thank you appears for half a heartbeat. Sometimes when I review the footage, I can still hear it, quiet, deliberate, endless. A single breath shared between worlds. The kind that sounds almost human,